What was that? Okay. Well, folks, I want to welcome everybody and thank everybody for staying around here today for today's Planning Ahead seminar. My name is Eric Baumann, and I work in community outreach with Washburn-McCreevy Funeral Chapels. By a show of hands, anybody familiar with Washburn-McCreevy Funeral Chapels? Okay. We have 19 conveniently located Twin Cities locations. If any Gopher fans in the house? If you listen to Gopher football broadcasts, you probably heard the name before. How about the Gophers yesterday? Wow, wasn't that great? And Pat, you had mentioned that your daughter is now giving post-game massages to the daughter-in-law, to the Gopher team. They're well-deserved today. That's for sure. Well, first of all, just a little bit about me. My name is Eric Baumann, and I am so ecstatic to be here today. My father is a Wisconsin Synod Lutheran pastor. He'd retired about 3 years ago, but I'm a product of the school system. I went to Zion Lutheran in Claytonia, Nebraska. I took a call in 1991 to Onalaska, Wisconsin, down by La Crosse. I'm a graduate of Luther High School, and I have 3 amazing children. I have a Gopher. I have an 18-year-old daughter who just began in mechanical engineering this fall. I have a 16-year-old boy, Cade, over at Rogers High School, and I have a 9-year-old boy named Phoenix. And we had those kids with a wife, a beautiful wife by the name of Casey, who's not here today. But I'm very excited to be here. I've been to 1,000 church services before, and I think I heard probably the best sermon that I have ever heard today. I feel like I'm batting after a Babe Ruth grand slam right now. But it was wonderful. But I'm happy to be here today, and because we're going to be talking about something that is not a hoot to talk about, death. I thought maybe we'd kick things off with some trivia today. All right, and kind of get the juices flowing here, have a little bit of fun. Our first question here today: which celebrity's funeral tickets were scalped for more than $10,000? Was it Michael Jackson? Was it the King? Was it our local boy, nice, down the highway, Prince, or was it John Lennon? Anybody have a guess? I heard an Elvis. It's not Elvis. Anyone else? Yes. Yeah, it was Michael Jackson. Michael Jackson had his funeral services at the Staples Center, where the Lakers played, and Beyonce was there, Stevie Wonder, Aretha Franklin, $10,000. It was a hot ticket, and everybody wanted into that one. All right, good job. Who owns the plot next to Marilyn Monroe? Was it Joltin' Joe DiMaggio? Was it Madonna? Was it Hugh Hefner? Or was it JFK? DiMaggio is always the first guest at these seminars I do. I know those two had some ties that we're not supposed to talk about in church, but no, it was not Joe DiMaggio. Any other guesses? No? You want to say what? You should have said Hugh Hefner. Because, where's my... Oh, wait, go back. So where's my ding, ding, ding? Oh, wait, okay, all right. So it got bigger. Yeah, it was Hugh Hefner. So I think it's pretty safe to say the guy was a creep in life and in death. But he purchased that crypt at Forest Lawn Cemetery in Los Angeles next to Marilyn Monroe. $75,000 he paid for that thing. So I got another trivia question, all right? This one's kind of this is off script. Does anybody know which year Minnesota became a state? That's correct. 1858. And the reason I bring that up is because Washburn-McCreevy opened their very first chapel in 1857. All right? So things were a little bit different than they are now. Back in 1857, it started out as Washburn Brothers furniture makers, right? And people would have these big Victorian houses with a room downstairs that was large, and that was the funeral parlor, and people would have these visitations in the people's home. And who better to make the casket than your local furniture artisan, right? So eventually the funeral business became pretty successful. They dropped the funeral industry They dropped the furniture side of things. Mr. Washburn took on his nephew, Donald McCreevy Sr. We are now on our fourth generation, Bill Jr. Some of you might have met Bill Jr. at some point. And his sister Cindy, they kind of run everything. They have boys, John, Brett, and Jordan, who are in management. And John has a 1-year-old boy. Jury is still out if it's Generation 6 right now. But we're locally owned and operated, and we have 19 chapels. 19 chapels throughout the Twin Cities. Now, I want to be crystal clear. I'm not here soliciting for Washburn McCreevy Funeral Chapels. I'm not trying to make Faith, an official church of Washburn McCreevy at all. But it's where I work, and we'll kind of be taking things just sort of from my perspective of knowledge from my career at Washburn McCreevy. And it's pretty much all across the board at all of your family-owned funeral homes throughout the Twin Cities. So this will be some very good information for all of you. So, to kind of piggyback on Pastor Dan's sermon here today, I want everybody to kind of get into the mindset of, different events that we all experience. Whether it's a wedding, death, birth, injury, job loss, job gain, war, moves, vacations, and graduations. They're all things all of us have experienced, and they change our lives, and they change the way we look at our own lives. So I want to kind of focus on one event that all of us have, as a nation, experienced collectively. Everybody remember what the New York City skyline looked like before 9/11? I'm going to go through some slides here, and I think by the time we get to number 2, I think you're all going to probably figure out, I know where he's going, and you're probably going to be right. But, when we experienced 9/11, we heard the news. By a show of hands, who remembers exactly where you were when you first heard the news of 9/11? Yeah, I'll get my hand up in the air too. All right? Just like a death, the initial sense was just, whoa, what just happened, right? And we hopped on the phone. We didn't have, it was very primitive texting at the time. Some of us had email. We all had phones. We all had a Hardee's. We all had a place for coffee. We had to share the news. We had to just see what others are making of this. By show of hands, who remembers, when you first saw it? If you were, unless you were on a mission trip, you're up at the boundary waters, hearing it wasn't enough. You had to turn on the TV, and you had to see the footage over and over and over again of the first plane hitting and the second plane hitting, people watching like this. And then we gathered nationally. Church attendance spiked. It skyrocketed. Everyone wanted to commune. They needed their community just to kind of make sense of all of this. And we gathered locally too. I remember I was a 24-year-old super senior at the University of Wisconsin-Eau Claire at that time. I'm not a doctor, no, but I remember that locally. I thought to myself, gas. Right? Gas is just going to skyrocket after this. So I'm going to sneak over to the gas station here before anybody else comes over here. Well, sure enough, there were 400 people over at the Holiday Station on Water Street. And it was just, it was the buzz. Everyone just wanted to say where they were, when they heard it, where they heard it, what their theories are. And then, we reflected on what was lost. Life was really going to change for all of us. Obviously things changed at the airports. I'm sure most of us thought about that. We all thought about gas. We all thought about how is this going to affect friends and family of ours that are, in the military, who just thought they were, maybe earning some money for school, and now they might get called somewhere. And it made us kind of reflect on our own lives too. How much time do I left? How much time do I have left? What roses am I not stopping and smelling enough? And then we celebrated, right? Did anybody remember watching that first New York Yankee game where George W. Bush threw out the opening pitch? There's a reason that game was the most watched MLB baseball game in history. We all collectively as a nation wanted to see that our world has hope, and that we're gonna get back to normalcy at some point. And the reason that I bring this up is because one day your friends and family are going to have their own personal 9/11 when they lose you. So a lot of people think to themselves, when it comes to my funeral, okay, I've got these plots that mom and dad left me years ago, or we bought them back in the 80s. I guess all they really need to do is just kind of decide if I'm going to be buried or cremated. I have two jobs with Washburn McCreevy. I do advanced funeral planning. My expertise is in that. I office primarily out of the Glen Haven Chapel on West Broadway in Crystal. And myself and two gals run the cemetery behind us, all right? And, I bring that up because I work on the pre-need side of things, and I also see some of that shock, sadness, tension, grief firsthand, when people come to, either claim their grave or buy a new one. And I think you'll all be very, very blown away at how many extra expenses come on top of a grave that you already own. So should I be buried? Should I be cremated? And we're going to get into all of that in a little bit. But at Washburn McCreevy, we like to educate everybody in what's referred to as the acute loss period. All right? It's that time from when you actually hear about the death of your loved one to you circle around to the top, to the actual onset of grief. And Pastor Dan did a great job of explaining the 5 steps of grief. I remember learning this in psychology class in college. I graduated with a 2.4 GPA, so I didn't remember all of them. Today was a nice little refresher. But those 5 stages of grief, this was great. Denial, anger, bargaining, depression, and acceptance. And, in that acute loss period, you're probably not going to really experience any of those except for maybe denial. When you think about any death that you've experienced in your own life, you hear the news, right? The initial sense is shock. Your world has just changed. This person that you've looked up to, this person that you've relied on, this person that's relied on you name any of those scenarios, it's gone. And life for you is going to change. So there is a severe sense of shock there. And, that first step is sharing the news. We hop on our cell phones, we text, we call people, and the more people that you call, you cast a wider net. And I believe personally, the wider net you cast, the more people you talk to, the greater chance you have of maybe one or two of those people actually saying something that's going to heal you and provide you with some real comfort. And then we share. And that first question that we always get when we share the news is, when can I see you? And when can I see my loved one final time? Which is code for, when is the funeral? And is there going to be an open casket? People want to know what they're walking into. I suppose we can all remember when cremation was a weird thing, right? It was something that kind of nobody did. You go to a funeral, you thought, it felt a little bit different. That is, and while it may or may not be weird to you, it is the norm now. 56% of people in the United States are cremating. And in Minnesota, that number's way higher. We're at about 80%. And, there are a lot of benefits to that. When you're cremated, you don't need to bury within 5 or 6 days. You can gather people when people can come. The expenses are a little bit lower, and that's awesome. And that is awesome. However, as we move to that next window right there, seeing. What's your name? Trudy? Trudy, if I told you I just saw your car blow up in the parking lot, I don't think you're just gonna grab your phone and calmly call Jake from State Farm, and come back to your funeral planning seminar. No, you're gonna hightail it out there. You're gonna have to see that for yourself. And the same thing happens with death. Our most, from a psychological standpoint, our most dominant sense is our sense of sight, right? And I'm here to tell you guys right now that just because, you may have chosen cremation or your loved one is choosing cremation, it doesn't mean that you can't see your loved one final time. Has anyone ever been part of a private viewing before? You have? Okay. So for those of you that aren't familiar with that, a private viewing, traditionally chosen in cremation cases, is your family for it's a very small fee, by the way. It's just under $300 to make this happen. But your loved one would be washed, disinfected. Your family could bring in clothes, if that was more comfortable for them. Some people choose to buy, like an inexpensive, moderate casket, for the viewing, but then the family has about an hour with their loved one, just immediate friends, immediate family, so they can process, they can internalize, talk to their loved one, touch their loved one, resolve grief with their loved one. So it is an option, all right? So don't just think because there's cremation that you're in the clear as far as someone seeing you, one final time before you pass. And Pastor brought up a good point, and we'll probably talk about this in a little bit too, but it's, you hear a lot of people saying, I don't want someone looking at me like that. I don't want someone remembering me like that. I know my wife said one time she does not want someone saying, that's the best she's ever looked, But it's not about me. It's not about her. It's what those closest to her need at the time of her death. We also offer, and most funeral homes do, I keep saying we because this is where I've spent all of my career. We also offer what's called the full service cremation. And that would be for people that would like to, have a public viewing at the service. In that case, your loved one would be embalmed, dressed, casketized, cosmetized, makeup, clothes, all of that. Funeral homes have what's called a ceremonial casket, which is really just a fancy term for a rental casket. But then, after the services, the family then has the body cremated, and then they can bury or scatter as they wish. Now, I talked about some of the benefits of cremation. One of the downfalls with cremation is, okay, I've got these grandkids who are studying in Costa Rica right now. They'll be back in 6 months. We'll have a service then. We've got brothers and sisters that are snowbirding in Florida or Arizona. We'll put something together then, right? And then what can happen is, well, maybe next year. You know what, I'm fine. I blew through the 5 stages of grief. I'm fine. We'll just keep this mantle on the fireplace, and I think everyone's going to be fine. Would anybody want to plan a wedding for 5 months? Or 5 years? Would anyone want to plan a graduation, for 6 years? It can be really tough on navigating your way through those 5 stages of grief if you never really get the closure that you need. And that's why a gathering is so important, because, I do these presentations at, senior living centers in Plymouth and the Crystal Legion and churches like this. And, everyone's kind of got different views. Everyone's like, we're just going to do a celebration of life. We're just going to do an Irish wake. A funeral gives a family an opportunity to field questions and answer people's questions about your death, right? Conversations about your death are going to happen. When a family has a funeral service, they can control them. They can say, yes, I want to hear the word sympathy and condolences over and over and over. Yes, I want to tell the story, about the death and how it happened and how I feel over and over. And I'd love to hear great stories about mom before she was my mom. I'd love to hear stories about dad, the dad you knew over at the lodge or whatever it was. And as a family, we've decided on Thursday from 11 to 2, that's when we're going to do that. If you don't have a gathering or a funeral service of some kind, those conversations will happen. They'll just happen unexpectedly at church, work, school, Aldi, the gym, the pickleball court, what have you. Connecting and reflecting kind of go hand in hand. If I'm over at the Crystal Legion, we're gonna talk about your celebration of life. We're gonna talk about, the open mics, the funny stories, beer, no beer, however they choose to do something like that. But here in the house of God, I know that we believe in a God that turns graves into gardens. We believe in a God that has prepared a room for us. And, as Pastor Dan so eloquently put it, this isn't about you. We know we're going to heaven. We are going to be in heaven for all of eternity, but because of sin, death, and the devil, and the shock that happens at the time of your death, you need to leave something behind for your family where they can be reminded of that. They need a funeral service where they can connect and reflect and take part in comforting scriptures, comforting hymns, and something that leaves every person in these seats with hope for the resurrection and that they're going to be reunited with you one day. And then, just like that celebration slide we showed you during the 9/11 journey, we celebrated death and at funerals, and that would be that luncheon. That luncheon down in the fellowship hall. I work over at the funeral home, and it's a real somber mood when people walk in. People don't always know what to say. They don't know what to expect at the funeral. But by the time that luncheon starts, I need to shut my door so I can work. It's just belly laugh after story after, why don't we only get together at funeral times, It gives you a chance to really take a pretty sad day and end it on a really good note, and then properly begin stages 2, 3, 4, and 5 of the 5 stages of grief. All right? So the funeral, this one's tough for me. For me, at my funeral, sinful nature in me, I'm always up in the balcony. I'm always up there watching. I got my sunglasses on. I got my hat pulled low. I'm up there taking attendance of who showed up, and I'm making sure the pastor's saying the funny things, and I'm making all these things. But I'm not going to be there. I'm going to be perfect. I'm going to be whole. I'm going to be with my Lord, waiting for my family one day. And I just want to hammer down on the fact that it's about what your loved ones need, to nurture their emotional, relational, and their spiritual needs. So now I want to take you through kind of the 5 most common reasons that people plan ahead. Number 1, urgent tasks and decisions can be handled ahead of time. Has anybody in here had to plan a funeral before where there was not a pre-arrangement in place? Was it awesome? No, the correct answer is no, it was not. When you're without a pre-arrangement, your family comes into a funeral home, sits down with a funeral director on the worst day of their life, emotions are raw. On average, you can expect 75 to 125 transactional conversations, right? What's mom's social security number? I don't know. What's dad's birthplace? I don't know. Any veterans in the house today? Any veterans? If your loved one is a veteran, there are many, many, many wonderful benefits, specifically free burial out at Fort Snelling. Any expense that's involved with burial, an expensive headstone, it's all covered out at Fort Snelling. The taps, the military flag, the honor guard, the rifle volley, all of those things they're entitled to for their amazing service to our country. However, if you don't know where your loved one's DD-214 form is, the honorary so now the kids, okay, I guess I can dig through his house. Dad was a hoarder. This is going to be awesome. It's those types of things. So with a pre-arrangement in place, you sit down with myself or someone else at another funeral home, and in about an hour, you've covered all of those 75 to 125 transactional conversations. It eliminates doubts. I've got 3 children. I've spoken to one of them. No, I've spoken to one of them. One of them asked me. I didn't know what to tell her. But with my 9-year-old son, who's kind of cut from my cloth, sappy, empathetic, overthinking. I grew up with a dad as a pastor. One of the churches during my formative years is right next to a cemetery. I used to help Dad out with funerals. It has a lot to do with why I'm standing here today. But to me, I think of my grandparents' funerals and all of these Lutheran funerals I was a part of. I told him straight up, I want a casket. I want a viewing. I want a message. I want hymns. I want scripture. I want a burial out at a cemetery. I want a final resting place for you guys all to visit, and that's what I've told him. Now, if I'm talking to my 18-year-old daughter, who's a carbon copy of her mother, specifically in the worry about money category, I'm going to tell her, listen, Avery, if I'm still the primary breadwinner of this family, just keep it cheap. Just do a direct and simple cremation. Just invite pastor and 20 people over to the Olive Garden, have them say a few words, call it a day, you know? And then, I got this 16-year-old son. Anyone ever tried to talk to a teenager before about something serious? Yeah, me too. The emotional wall comes up, and funny comedian dad, we deflect with jokes, and I'll tell him what I used to tell my friends when I was younger. I'm a huge baseball fan, and I'd say, you know what Daddy wants? I want to be cremated, and I want to be launched out of a cannon at home plate at Target Field. I want to go over the center field fence, and I want to die hitting one final home run, right? So, Do I mean any of those things? The first one, yes. Well, now fast forward, hopefully 40 years, and these are kids in their 50s and 60s. I don't have a pre-arrangement. Now they're sitting there with that funeral director with their 75 to 125 different transactional conversations. You got Phoenix saying Dad wants a casket in a cemetery. You have Avery saying the Olive Garden thing, and you have Cade saying, no, darn, I've spent the last 30 years organizing this stupid Target Field launching cannon thing that Dad wanted, and we're going to do that, And now there's tension. You don't want your kids experiencing tension at the time of your death. I was recently sent a podcast from somebody. It was one of our nerdy industry funeral podcasts, and what the expert was saying was, when there's doubt at the time of somebody's death, doubt spending comes into play. Do you know what your dad would have wanted? I don't, which means I'm going to give him the best, and that's where kids start, okay, I'll take the $19,000 bronze Michael Jackson casket, and we'll get one of those $100,000 private mausoleums, and we'll instead of a hearse, we're going to get a white horse-drawn carriage. We're called as Christians to be good stewards of the blessings that God have given us, right? While I would find that flattering if my children spent that kind of money on me, I would also think it's pretty dumb. I wouldn't want them spending more money on something, when we know heaven is the ultimate goal and Jesus paid that price, right? So it eliminates doubts. Number 3, it gives you the peace of mind. I'll just say this. I've done hundreds of these pre-arrangements now. Everybody I've worked with has been thinking about this for some amount of time. They know that their own deaths are inevitable, and you just feel 50 pounds of emotion being lifted off of people, once we shake hands, for the final time, knowing that it's all in place. And now all they have to do is live out the rest of their lives. The family can be with each other. If they're fighting over the expensive casket, if they're fighting over scattering versus a burial place, this is a time for them to be loving on each other, hugging each other, leaning into the Lord, all of those things. But if your funeral became a financial burden where they're like, okay, I guess I'll spend $12,000 on my 21% credit card until the life insurance kicks in eight weeks down the road, I guess we can split up this to-do list and you go to Hennepin County, you call it. They're not celebrating their life. They're not remembering you. They're not leaning into the Lord if this has become an errands and stress fest. And finally, the costs can be addressed ahead of time. In a few moments, we're going to get into a funeral pre-need policy, and we're going to talk about how, pre-arranging for your funeral actually locks in today's prices for the rest of your life, but the family isn't going to owe anything at the time of your death with a pre-arrangement. So a funeral pre-need policy is really just a fancy term for a small whole-term life insurance policy where the funeral home is named as the primary beneficiary, all right? There was once a day when, someone would go in to do a pre-arrangement at the funeral home, and they'd get all of their final wishes in one place, and they would slide a big pile of cash or a check across the table and really just have faith in their local funeral home that they would do right by them at the time of their passing. And you know what? 99.9% of the time, those wishes were honored and everything went fine. However, again, sin, death, and the devil. You'd hear stories on the news of funeral homes coming on tough times. Perhaps they're going through a drought. In our industry, it's when no one passes away. But funeral directors need to get paid, the plumbing, the lights, the hearse might need a new transmission, what have you. And sometimes dishonest funeral directors in desperation would tap into those funds, and then the deceased, their final wishes weren't honored at the time of their death. So in 1985, the Federal Trade Commission put the kibosh on that, and they made a very consumer-friendly law that says all money must be held in a third party in the client's name. So at Washburn McCreevy, we work with a company called Funeral Directors Life Insurance. They've been doing this now for about 40 years. They are the best, in my opinion. But the number one benefit here is because it's held through an insurance policy, it guarantees the cost. I sat down for I did a pre-arrangement with one of my friends a couple of months ago. He's about my age, and he wanted a big one. His funeral was going to be about $19,000, casket, big fancy reception, all this and that. And I have this tool that I'll show people, and he was kind of pushing back quite a bit because, well, I have a $500,000 life insurance policy. I'm going to be fine. And I said, maybe. But the tool I have actually shows you what $19,000 with inflation is going to cost in 5 years, 10 years, 20 years. And then it takes you out to what your life expectancy was. And on paper, his was like 86 years old. His policy currently in 2024, $19,000. When I showed him what it would look like in 46 years when he passed, it was $168,000. So even while that life insurance is in place, life insurance is for the living, right? You don't want to say, hey kids, you have $500,000 waiting for you. Just kidding, I lied. It's $350,000 because we're spending that much on my funeral. So it guarantees the cost. The funds are protected. Is anybody caring for elderly parents right now? Anybody caring for anybody in a nursing home or a memory care facility? Those are, if someone spends their last 5-10 years in a memory care facility, on chemotherapy for the last 5 years of their life, so on and so forth, they could have been good stewards of their money their entire life and had a nice, robust savings account and a plan. Those types of things can eat up all of that money. And the county, Medicare, Medicaid, at the time of your passing, your life insurance policy actually becomes an asset, the cash value of that they can actually get after as well. The money from a funeral policy, the funeral director's life insurance one I was talking about, is protected. In fact, the primary beneficiary is named as the funeral home. So at the time of your death, the funeral home becomes owner of it. So you don't have to worry about scrambling to get money or waiting for life insurance to kick in for that to happen. The funeral home will honor those things immediately. It is transferable. So if you were to come and set up a pre-need with me at Washburn McCreevy's Glen Haven Chapel in Crystal, we wouldn't name Washburn McCreevy Glen Haven Chapel Crystal as the primary beneficiary. We actually name any funeral home as its interest may appear. All right, so what that means is, I hate to pick on you here, Dan, but I have actually set up a few of these with a couple Wisconsin-City Lutheran pastors here because, nomadic, right? You how many calls have you taken now? and he's staying forever, guys. Don't worry about that. But I mean, if you have a possible move to Florida on the radar, if you have a kid who lives out east and someday you're like, I can't afford it now, but hopefully maybe one of these days I can move out and be closer to them and be closer to my grandkids, these funds are transferable, all right? And you can pay over time, all right? So yes, if you don't like having monthly payments, you could pay off your entire funeral bill all at once. Me personally, again, I'm the primary breadwinner, family of 5. I wouldn't have a $10,000 check I could write out. So because it's an insurance policy, you can do premium payments. And you could pay over 3 years, 5 years, 10 years, even 20 years. And you have coverage the entire time you're paying this off. I have an example here. About 8 months ago, I set up a funeral pre-arrangement for a 61-year-old gentleman and his wife. They were both in great health. I believe his monthly payment he chose to do it over 10 years, and his monthly payment was about $150. 3 months later, the Lord unexpectedly took him home by way of a heart attack, and when he passed, his family owed nothing, right? The rest of the balance is forgiven, and his family owed nothing. So I believe his funeral total bill was close to $10,000. He made 3 monthly payments for about $150 apiece. So he got his dream funeral for his family for about $450. All right? And I just want to say, while everything that I just listed right there, I'm not a financial planner. Some of those things seem pretty good, right? Great ways of justifying doing something like this. However, the single most important reason you're doing this is to take that burden off of your spouse, off of your children, and be able to give them, that gift that 75 to 125 transactional conversations were taken care of by mom and dad ahead of time. Things were paid for by mom and dad ahead of time, so they can lean into the Lord and they can lean into each other. One FAQ I usually get first is, well, what if I'm on a cruise? What if I'm on a trip in Nashville and I pass away unexpectedly? With an advanced funeral plan in and of itself is not necessarily going to be enough. That's why we include with all of our plans Sepio Guard, out of area travel protection. All right, I had a friend of mine. His wife passed away unexpectedly in the Raleigh-Durham, North Carolina area, and they're from Brooklyn Park. They wanted to bury and have a funeral service back here for her. What happened in that case was the funeral home in Raleigh-Durham, North Carolina charged about $2,000 just to hold on to his wife until he knew exactly what he was going to do. So when he came up with his plan, it then cost approximately $3,000 to $4,000 to ship her back to MSP. And then the funeral home, he didn't have a pre-arrangement, he was in his early 40s. Then the funeral home here charged another $2,000 just to get the ball rolling and proceed with the funeral service. With the Sepio Guard out of area travel protection, you can pass away wherever the Lord decides. And if you need to bring your loved one back here for a full burial, it's covered. Even if you're being cremated, they can cremate you in the city of your passing, and you can bring it back in the front seat of the Honda or in your carry-on. But if you wanted to have that private family viewing, you save a lot of money with the out-of-area travel protection. All right? So, this is a final wishes organizer. And as you'll see, I don't have a pile of these to hand out to everybody. These folders that are in front of you are something different. The final wishes organizer is something, if I were to hand each of you one of them right now, it's just going to be a general price list. A couple pamphlets with perfect looking people on the front of them, and the final wishes organizer really becomes yours and becomes personal when you sit down with an advanced funeral planner and really go through all of the I's that needed to be dotted and the T's that need to be crossed, right? And it's putting an intentional plan in place. So, at this time, a little bit of housekeeping here. So I have not worked on a Sunday since I was in college, right? I have kept my Sabbath holy for the last 25 years. I actually had about 9 different alarms to make sure I did not miss this morning. I think I emailed myself every single day. But I made it here. I brought everything that I was supposed to bring. I did not bring my business cards. So would you guys, before we open it up for a Q&A session, would you guys all mind taking the funeral swag pens I gave you? And I'd just like to have you guys really quick write down my name. And it's Eric Baumann, E-R-I-C, B-A-U-M-A-N-N. And my office number is 763-231-3892. And go ahead and put my cell number on there too. I know some people think it's weird to talk, so you guys can text me if you want to text too. My cell phone number is 763-257-5938. Okay? Does anybody have any questions? Yeah.
Are there, rules and regulations that you can cover with people as far as where you cannot scatter ashes?
Yeah, so her question was, are there rules and regulations as far as where you can scatter? In Minnesota, the state we live in, the state I work in, the rules here are you can scatter on private property. In some states, that's not on your own personal private property. You can scatter. And for as far as scattering in public places, such as Gooseberry Falls, Boundary Waters, you would need permission from either the business owner or the park ranger. Did that answer your question?
My next question would be, have park rangers actually given permission?
Sure. Oh yeah, absolutely. Yes. Yeah. So park rangers have given permission for those kinds of things. Absolutely. Anybody else? Yes.
So if you have this all in line and you pay in payments or whatever you're doing to pay for this, does that also include if you do the fuel first and then the cremation or the afterwards?
Yeah.
Does it include all of that? Or?
So what's interesting, her question was, with a pre-need policy, and you want to have a private family viewing, is that included with the plan, right? Mm-hmm. So here's the beauty about a funeral prearrangement. Let me go through a handful of different packages that my funeral home offers. All right. Number one, we have the direct and simple cremation. All right, and until November 1st, the price on that is $2,995. By the way, so our price increase is coming up November 1st. Historically, prices go up about 9 to 10% every single year, all right? So direct and simple cremation, what that is family pays for a direct and simple cremation. We take your loved one into our care. We perform the cremation. We place your loved one in the urn that was selected, if there was one selected. We call next of kin. Family comes and picks them up. And that's really kind of where it ends. All right, so the hand-holding kind of stops right there. Now so with a pre-need policy, with any of these policies that I bring up, you can build it however you want to. So you can put $500 in there if you want to make sure the kids don't have to pay for flowers. You can put $1,000 in there to make sure that the kids don't have to pay for the luncheon after the funeral. You can put $300 in there for the clergy honorarium. You can, it's a good one. Yeah, Pastor Dan likes that one. Organists have to learn the hymns. Sometimes a gift is given to that. If you own a burial space, I can speak for Glen Haven Memorial Gardens. For a full casketed burial, it costs $1,995 to open and close a grave. To bury somebody cremated remains, it costs about $1,200 to open and close the grave. If you wanted to go into a columbarium niche, those little cubbies, I guess, for lack of a better term, where cremated remains are buried, that costs about $800 to open and close that every time. So all of those little expenses that your family might feel nickeled and dimed by the funeral director without a prearrangement in place, they can say, no, flowers are covered. Who's your florist? Cardell Florals. All right, we'll write the check out to them. Who's your pastor? Pastor Dan Schmidt. Okay, we'll write that check out to him. We'll write the check out to the organist. We'll write the check out to the caterer. So we handle all of those things. So if you just did like a direct and simple cremation, you could put that private family viewing in there. It's about $295, and that would be honored, right? Another thing that's really nice is, let's say you put $295 into the pre-arrangement for the private family viewing, and the circumstances, maybe it was a car accident, maybe it was a fire, or maybe it was a hospice situation where everybody was with mom when she passed. Then you might not need something like that. Any money put into that policy can be used for anything else within the funeral. If you don't use $295 for the open and close, you could put another $295 towards the food. Or if you don't use all the food, but you want a private family viewing, you could, rob Peter to pay Paul and pay for the private family viewing. Or, and this happens all the time, someone might put together a full traditional casketed burial pre-arrangement together for $15,000. And that's a middle of the road. You don't have to pay that much for that. But, and then later in life, they watch the right sad movie, or they go to enough funerals and their mind has changed and they decide on cremation. Any money not used or overspent goes back into your estate. So I encourage everybody just to get a plan in place. You don't have to have all of the answers when you put a plan in place, but you have something in place to alleviate that shock. And I'll just kind of round out some of the pricing. $29.95 for a direct and simple cremation. For a cremation with a memorial service and a 1-hour visitation, which is kind of the most popular one that we do for cremation services, that would include the use of, any of our 19 funeral chapels, funeral director there kind of running the show, staff in attendance, all of the flowers and food and everything is shipped over to one place, $41.95. And if you wanted to have the service at your own church, that would just involve the funeral staff, attendants, directing everything and driving everything over to the church, and then helping the pastors and the ladies' aid and the church staff with everything over here. That's kind of the most popular one. And then I had mentioned the full service cremation, where the body is embalmed, rental casket, viewing here at the church or the funeral home. That one starts at approximately $68,000 or $6,800. And then it doesn't include the rental casket. The rental casket is $1,295. We also have cremation caskets, which are, they're wood, obviously. And we have, from beauty to the pine box where the people could be cremated with that. And does everyone understand the full service cremation? Okay. And then your traditional burial with the embalming, funeral service at the chapel or the church, that's approximately $6,700 and does not include the price of the casket. But then you can build it up however you choose to do so with as many cash advance items as you'd like. The food would be a cash advance item, clergy honorarium, organist honorarium, food, flowers, open and closing fees. So you can put that almost $2,000 away to open and close the grave into the policy. So these are all good questions. Anybody else? Okay. Well, inside of your folder, I would ask that you take a moment. And by the way, I'll hang out here for Packer games at 3:25. I will hang out here for a little while, and if anybody has any questions that they just weren't comfortable asking in front of the group, feel free to ask me. The form. So if you guys could all just take a minute and fill out this family planning form right here. If you could just write your name, your phone number, email if you'd like, and address, and then just check some of those boxes. Some of you might have. Here's a frequently asked question. Here's one that I get all the time. Does anybody here have a cremation set up already with Neptune, Cremation Society, Crescent Tide, any of those? Okay, so let's say you set up something low-key and inexpensive, today. You have something in place, and then you decide as time goes on that you wanted to, add more things to it or just change it altogether. You can always, open up a second supplemental policy as well. All right? All right, so if you guys would just all fill out those forms and, just leave those up front with me. I really want to thank you guys for having me here today. This was awesome. I saw, of course my father probably quietly had hoped that I would one day become a pastor, and the Lord kind of chose me for a different ministry. The prearrangement side of things is mostly fun, mostly lighthearted conversations, for the most part. I'm not just gonna, joke with you the entire time, but I also get to see the sadness, especially on the cemetery side of things, and that's become a ministry for me. I have a Bible verse I wanted to share with you guys, if you don't mind. It might be kind of cool if you just maybe have this slipped into your paperwork, someday, so maybe your kids run into this someday. Is everyone familiar with Philippians 4, 6, and 7? It's a pretty tough time at the time of your death, whether there's a prearrangement or no prearrangement, and a lot of anxiety, can be caused at that time. It's crippling anxiety, and that verse says, "Be anxious about nothing, but in everything, through prayer and thanksgiving and petition, bring your requests to God." And this is my favorite part. "And that peace of God that surpasses all understanding will guard your hearts and guide your minds through faith in Christ Jesus." It might be neat if you share that with your children and loved ones left behind one day, and they can remember that at the time you're gone. A funeral service, a Christian funeral service is in a plan in place, is a great gift you can give them. So we'll end it here. I want to thank you very much. Pastor, do you have any final words at all? Okay. Thank you. Thank you.